let me try that again. Hi, this is Rob Darrow from iNACOL. Glad you're all here. Hopefully you've all had a chance to check your sounds and you're hearing me okay. And we'll get started in just a minute. Couple notes about the webinar. First of all of you received the link for this. That's how you got here. Below the link you received is a recording link. And so eventually this webinar will be recorded, and then you'll be able to view the recording. Or if you know other people that are interested in this topic, feel free to send that recorded link to those other people. The one thing to note is that it takes maybe 24 hours to the recording to render and that sort of thing. So if you click on it an hour after the webinar is over, it probably won't work. But give it 24 hours and then it should work just fine. So just wanted to make sure you knew that. So I want to welcome you. Again, I'm Rob Darrow. I put my picture up there partially because there's a lot of research that talks about social presence in the online world, that showing a picture helps to create that connection and relationship with students and other people that are doing it. So there's my picture there. For those of you who are not familiar with iNACOL, we're the International Association for K-12 Online Learning, and that includes blended learning. We have really three areas we focus on: networking and collaborating between ourselves with other experts in the field, and with webinars such as this. We advocate for online and blended learning through a variety of initiatives, through policies, state, local, and district policies as well. And then we have a research direction as well. We have a research committee, and we focus on that as well. So just out of curiosity, right below where you have your name on the left-hand screen, if you are a member of iNACOL, would you click on that little smiley face there? So either you're having a hard time, oh, there's those smiley faces. Okay, great. So okay, we've got a good number, and it's exciting to meet a number of people who are not iNACOL members. So for those of you who are not iNACOL members, we'd love to have you, and you can click on our link afterwards and learn more about us. So to get started, what I'd like you to do on the left-hand part of your screen is a little star icon. And if you click on that, it's going to allow you to click and show us where in the United States you are. So I'm going to click and put my little star there. If you do the same, it'd be great to see where we're all from. So once again, on the left side of your screen, just to the right of the list where all the people are, is a little star. If you click on that star and show us where you're from. Yes, and it's always great to see people who know how to choose other icons besides a star. Okay, so everybody here is from the United States, which is great because that's who the NCAA governs, although I suppose Nick could speak to this more later. They may have influence over the other parts of the world, but for now, that's where we're at. All right, thanks. So again, just a couple notes of interest. In iNACOL, we have three different types of webinars. We have a leadership webinar, which this is. We focus on the administration of online and blended learning programs. Our next one will be October 10th, and we've got a school district that's going to talk about their school district policies requiring online course for graduation. We have teacher talk webinars that are each month. They focus on teaching and online and blended learning. We've got one coming up next week, Thursday, September 20th. It's called A Conversation with Online Teachers of the Year. And then finally, we have special webinars, which appear every so often. And we do have one this year where we're going to share our membership report, our annual iNACOL update. So especially for those of you who are not iNACOL members, we'd love to have you come listen more about who we are and what we do, and love to have you. So all the webinars in September are free. In October, we begin our fee-based programs and webinars, and so you can read more about that as well. We do have a yearly conference called the Virtual School Symposium. Hopefully you'll join us October 21st to 22nd. 21st to 24th, that should say. Sorry about that. And there's always over 2,000 attendees, and again, you can see the link there. It's a great conference. If you've never been, it's a great way to network in person with everybody who's involved in online and blended learning. And then finally, we do give awards yearly for research, for innovative online learning, for outstanding individual contribution to K-12 online learning, and then finally the National Online Teacher of the Year. All of these awards are due next week, and so if you know somebody or even yourself are interested in applying, then you can see that link there and you can check that out. So that's my commercial announcements from iNACOL. We're pleased today to offer this webinar to you called the NCAA Eligibility Requirements and Online Courses. And our presenter today is Nick Sproul, who's the Assistant Director of the NCAA Eligibility Center. And with that, Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can share a little bit more about yourself. As you're going through, let me just say this before Nick starts. If you've got any questions, type them into the chat room. I'll be watching the chat room while Nick is talking. In general, we'll save questions that can be answered at the end, unless it's a question that's really important to answer in the context of his presentation, then I'll ask it. Otherwise, we'll save those questions for the end. Okay, great. So with that, Nick, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Rob. I really appreciate it. Again, my name is Nick Sproul, and I serve as Assistant Director of High School Review at the NCAA Eligibility Center. And as I scroll through the participants here in the main room, I see a lot of familiar names. We've had the joy and the pleasure of working with a lot of folks from iNACOL over the last 5 years. We've done several of these webinars and attended numerous virtual school symposium events. We're going to be doing 2 sessions at the virtual school symposium this year, one a beginner session and one an advanced session. The topics that we're going to talk about here today, some of it may be familiar to some of you. Some of it is brand new material, and other parts of it are wrinkles, kind of new wrinkles to previously covered topics and issues that we've seen. So during our time here together, we're going to talk about just what is the NCAA and what is initial eligibility. We'll talk about the high school review process, the process by which schools and programs establish lists of courses that can be used by student athletes in the certification process. I want to point your attention to a couple of trends that we've seen, and then I want to put special emphasis on some new requirements that will be set in place for 2016, which is current high school freshmen. I've told Rob that I'm going to kind of plow through this presentation, and if there's something that needs immediate clarification, I've asked him to step in and let me know. Otherwise, we'll save questions to the end. I am particularly awful at trying to talk and read comments at the same time. Actually, it makes my head almost explode. So I'm trusting Rob to help monitor the comments and the questions you all have, and we'll cover them here at the end. So to start off, what is the NCAA? It's a voluntary membership-based organization to which colleges and universities can join. It is the largest governing body of intercollegiate athletics. It is a federated organization, meaning that there are 3 divisions, and colleges and universities choose which division they want to be part of based on their institutional missions and philosophies. So Division 1 is probably the division that folks are most familiar with. That's typically larger schools, the ones that you see playing football and basketball on TV throughout the year. These are typically large public institutions, but there are a number of small private liberal arts schools that, based on their institutional missions and philosophies, have chosen to invest money at the level required of Division I institutions. Division II, similar to Division I, offers athletically related financial aid. These institutions tend to be small to medium-sized schools that travel for athletics participation is more regional than it is national. And then Division III, a lot of people are surprised to know, is actually the largest of the 3 divisions by members. These tend to be small private liberal arts schools. There are no athletically related scholarships that are available. But again, there are several. Washington University in St. Louis comes to mind, Johns Hopkins, schools that are powerhouse research institutions that have chosen to be a part of Division III. Again, all based off of institutional mission and philosophy. What does the Eligibility Center do? First of all, the Eligibility Center is the entity responsible for the certification, both academic and amateurism, of all incoming freshman student athletes for Divisions I and II. Some of you may be familiar with or have heard of the NCAA Clearinghouse. The Clearinghouse was the entity responsible for this process between the years 1993 and 2007. That was run by ACT in Iowa City, Iowa. In 2007, the NCAA opted not to renew the contract with ACT and instead chose to create its own version, which is the Eligibility Center. And we've been in business for 5 years now, and I've been with the Eligibility Center since it started. The Eligibility Center comprises a number of departments that all work together to get the job done. I'm a member of the high school review staff. Again, that's the staff responsible for working with the 30,000 plus high schools on ensuring that the lists of NCAA courses are as up-to-date and accurate as possible. We have a customer service department, amateurism, academic certification, and some of you may be familiar with the National Letter of Intent program that also is run here at the Eligibility Center. A few did-you-knows, just to give you a picture of the work we do. All the mail, 500,000 pieces a year that comes into us, gets scanned and imaged so that everything can be pulled up electronically. We certify between 90,000 and 100,000 students a year, which is nuts when you think about it. We start getting final high school transcripts usually mid-June of every year, right after graduation, and those kids have to get on campus and certified sometimes by the first week of August. So it's a race for us to get those kids through our system, and so the goal for us is efficiency and effectiveness and trying to make sure that we have as few speed bumps as possible. Another fun number that I like to share with people is that of the 30,000 high schools in our system, they all have the ability to log into our system and submit core courses for review to be used in the certification process. We review roughly 400 to 500 individual core courses per day, which is mind-blowing, especially when you consider that the high school review staff is a staff of 10, and roughly a third of our staff is devoted to that core course review. So a lot of work being handled on our end. What is initial eligibility? That's what we're talking about. In order for a student who is a first-year student at a Division I or Division II college or university, in order for them to practice, compete, and receive athletically related aid, they have to be certified through the Eligibility Center. Subsequent years of eligibility are governed by progress toward degree requirements and other types of academic requirements. So it is possible for a student to be initially eligible and then lose their eligibility once they arrive on campus. But we're not here today to talk about any of that. All we're talking about is initial eligibility, which has a lot of implications for the high schools. The evolution of initial eligibility is interesting. I actually there are a lot of dates and events that have happened over the decades that I didn't include on this slide. The first rule was back in 1965, so initial eligibility has been around for almost 50 years. Up until 1993, initial eligibility certification happened on campus. So I'll use a couple of local institutions here in Indiana. If IU and Purdue were recruiting the same student, they each were uniquely responsible for determining whether or not that student was eligible. And as you may imagine, some institutions fudged where others did not, and there was a call and a need for an independent body. That was the birth of the Clearinghouse. We, the Eligibility Center, now do the process. But I think what you'll see as you look through that is that initially the idea of initial eligibility was a competitive equity type of a rule whereby schools just didn't want other schools to unfairly admit students purely for athletics reasons. Over time, and especially over the last 10 years, the focus and the emphasis has really moved more toward academic reform, college readiness, college preparedness, with the end game being college graduation. We really do buy into the company line, which is that we want student athletes to have meaningful academic experiences. The percentage of them that will go on professionally for their athletics is so small that it's essential that they have meaningful academic experiences that prepare them for life beyond their experience as student athletes. Who makes the rules? This is something that was interesting to me. I came from the world of college admission and then was on the high school side as a counselor and college advisor prior to my time here. And I, like many others, assumed that the folks who work for the NCAA are the ones that make up the rules, and that's actually not the case. The NCAA is, like I said, a federated, membership-driven organization, and the membership of the NCAA makes up its rules. So there is a governance structure. In Division I, it's a representative structure. So just like Texas has more members in the House of Representatives than does Rhode Island, the Big Ten has more votes than does maybe a smaller conference. For Divisions 2 and 3, it's convention voting, where it's a one school, one vote, but all of the rules are vetted through a series of academic committees. And I always think it's important for folks in the world of online education to know that there is representation from INACOL in our governance structure. There are two different committees, one called the High School Review Committee and another called the Student Records Review Committee, both of which have staff members from INACOL, Susan Patrick and Allison Powell, who have been instrumental not only in helping us to, as staff members, know and understand the world of online education, but also have been just absolutely crucial in helping the entire association know and understand the implications of quality online learning. Those of us who work on staff use the rules that are adopted by our membership to guide the work that we do. Some commonly used terms that some of you may be familiar with, others maybe not. Prospective student athlete, or a PSA, is simply a student who wishes to participate in intercollegiate athletics. No more simple or more complicated than that. A qualifier is a student who meets all of the initial eligibility requirements. Jumping down to the bottom, a non-qualifier is a student who does not meet the requirements. Kind of in the middle there is something unique to Division II for the time being, and I'll explain that more in a little bit. Division II has what is called a partial qualifier, where a student who only meets some of the requirements but not all is eligible to receive athletically related aid, and they can practice, but they cannot compete. We'll come back to that here in just a little while. The four elements, the building blocks of our ability to determine whether or not a student is eligible coming out of high school academically, are number one, graduated from high school. Number two, a minimum number of core courses. We'll talk about those here in a minute. Students have to have a certain GPA within those courses, and then they have to have a certain SAT or ACT score relative to the core course GPA. So what does that look like? Well, Division I and Division II have slightly different core course requirements. Both require a total of 16 core courses, but the distribution that you see there for each division is slightly different. And a lot of people say, well, why is that? That's very complicated. It goes back to the fact that we're a federated organization, and the membership within Division II has looked at the data and the statistics and has determined that that particular distribution of core courses is the best predictor of first-year success for their student body populations. The Division I members have looked at their data and statistics and said that that particular distribution is the best predictor of success for their student population. So while they're similar, there are a couple of differences. But the important thing is that students have to earn the 16 core courses in the prescribed distributions in order to be eligible. As a general rule of thumb, I know that most student athletes aim for the Division I minimum standards because by satisfying those, they will satisfy the Division II requirements. This slide here is something called the Division I sliding scale, and I know it looks like a mess on your screen to look at. You're welcome to Google Division I sliding scale and pull up the document to see a better, cleaner version for yourself. But once students have satisfied the 16 core course requirement in the prescribed distribution for Division I, this table shows the required GPA and test score that they have to earn in order to be eligible. The sliding scale, for example, a student with a 2.20 GPA over on the right-hand side has to have a 940 SAT or a sum score 79 on the ACT in order to be eligible. A lot of folks ask us, why do you use a sum score? The reason is that it provides students the best possible chance of being eligible. If, for example, a student took the ACT, which has 4 subsections, on test date number 1 and earned a 20, a 20, a 20, and a 20, their composite score would be 20. On test date number 2, they could get a 20, a 20, a 20, and a 21, still having a composite score of 20. But in our sum score, it gives them an 81, which could make the difference between them being eligible or not. So that chart is important. That chart, though, is only for Division I. For Division II, it's a lot more simple. For Division II, students simply have to have a 2.0 core course GPA in the prescribed distribution with either an 820 SAT or a 68 sum score on the ACT. I do want to point out that when we talk about the SAT, we're not talking about the writing section, just the critical reading and the math. Division III does not go through the Eligibility Center. There are no specific NCAA requirements for academic eligibility. Generally, it's based on the admission standards of that institution. Something else that I think is always very important to address is who is responsible for what, because I know that when I was on the high school side, it was never clear to me what my role was as a guidance counselor and who needed to do what. It is a shared responsibility, and here are some guidelines. The role of a student, and at the end of the day, onus is on the student to earn his or her academic eligibility, is to be academically prepared and to go through the registration process with us. The role of the recruiting college or university is to monitor student progress and to identify any issues that may arise and advise the students accordingly. And then the role of the high school or the program is to establish and or maintain the list of NCAA courses and to send us transcripts or grade reports when necessary. Now, the world of online education has made this process a little bit more complicated, and we work really hard with states, with programs, with schools, with consortia on ensuring that that process is as smooth as possible, but it can be complicated from time to time. And I know some of you on this webinar I've talked to on the phone about these issues, and we really do try hard to make it smooth for everybody. I want to get into a little bit more about the high school review process, and this is probably what impacts all of you the most. A little bit of history. Back in the day when a clearinghouse was in operation, creating a list, establishing a list there was not a review process. Anyone who wanted to could set up a list. Back in 2006, there were a number of reports, New York Times, Washington Post, USA Today, about rogue high schools. They were referred to then as diploma mills that were fraudulently proposing documents, giving us documents that led us to believe students were, in fact, prepared for college. The kids showed up and they weren't. And it became a really big issue, and so the NCAA membership spoke up and legislated a high school review process whereby NCAA staff members could investigate or review high schools and potentially decide not to accept any documentation from those schools. That issue of diploma mills has really become a non-issue. We don't even use the phrase diploma mill anymore. Because those who tried to operate them, we've since said we will no longer accept documents from, and those who want to try to abuse the system have found other ways to do that, and we'll get to that here in just a little bit. There are two types of reviews that we'll do. We'll review schools or programs that are new to the NCAA. Excuse me. And at times we'll also review established schools if there are irregularities that pop up that need some type of review or investigation. When we review schools, whether they're new or they've already got a list with us, sometimes there's a programmatic review where we'll look at quality control and just the general governance of the school. And if we do approve a school to establish a list, there's a second process where schools submit individual courses to be added to their list, and that's that core course review piece that I mentioned to you. So those are the 400 to 500 courses that are submitted per day from already existing high schools. Schools and programs that are given a list of NCAA courses, it's important to know what that is and what that isn't. It is simply a list of courses that have been purported to align to our legislation, meaning that based off the information that we have, we feel comfortable saying that the courses on a high school's list meet our requirements. What it is it's not accreditation, it's not certification. We're not an accrediting body, and there is no guarantee that the courses on a high school's list are ironclad going to be used for a student. We rely on the accuracy of the information that we receive, and there are times where we establish lists of courses for high schools and later find out that the information that we were given was inaccurate or in some cases just misleading. And in those cases, sometimes we are not able to use those courses for students, and there are unique circumstances for us to work with those students in those types of situations. But we always want to make note of the fact that we are not an accrediting body, and accreditation is or the presence of a list of NCAA courses is not an endorsement of any kind. There are three types of questionnaires that we send to schools that want to establish lists with us. And this can be a brick and mortar school that's an outgrowth of an already existing brick and mortar district. It could be a state-run virtual school. It could be a private charter school. A virtual charter school. It could be a private school. It could be anything. Depending on the type of school, we may send one of three types of questionnaires. And again, that is our way of gathering, collecting information to determine how to treat the school. So the first one, the ARQ, the ARQ, the Academic Review Questionnaire, is the questionnaire that we send to traditional brick and mortar high schools. The second, and that's the one that a lot of you I know on this webinar are familiar with, is called the NARQ, the NARQ, the Non-Traditional Academic Review Questionnaire. And the questions in the NARQ are really geared toward fully 100% online, in some cases blended schools and programs, where we ask questions about curriculum delivery, instructional design, quality control, transcripts and grade reports, and those types of things. The third questionnaire is the NCQ, the Non-Traditional Coursework Questionnaire, and that questionnaire is reserved for brick and mortar schools and districts who have a newly created non-traditional option, whether it's credit recovery or a district-led online initiative or whatever the case may be. That's what we use that questionnaire for. And again, all of the answers and responses in the questionnaire are what we use to evaluate whether or not a program aligns with our legislative requirements, which I'll talk about here in just a second. So, what in the heck is a core course in the first place? Well, let's first talk about core courses in general, regardless of whether they're delivered traditionally or online or blended or what have you. In order for a course to be approved, number one, it has to be in one of the primary content areas: English, math, science, social studies, foreign language. It has to be at or above the school's regular academic level. So, for example, if a school has Honors Algebra 1, Regular Algebra 1, and Basic Algebra 1, the Basic Algebra 1 cannot be approved because it's below the regular academic level. And then the course has to be considered college preparatory, and that's a little bit of a gray area, and we use the direction of our high school review committee as well as precedent to make those kinds of determinations. But an example of something that may be a little bit in the gray area would be a high school that teaches, for example, film literature, where at high school number 1, film literature may be a perfectly acceptable core course that has critical reading and critical writing and analysis, and it truly is the literature of the film. Whereas at high school number 2, film literature could be more focused on cinematography and lighting and sound and the history of film genre, etc. We would happily approve the first, but not the second, as a college preparatory English course. So of those 400 to 500 courses that we reviewed per day, that's part of what that process is just reviewing the content within the courses themselves. Typical core courses: AP Calculus, Biology, Advanced Comp, French 5. Courses that are easy for us to say no to on title alone: Marching Band, Personal Finance. We received submissions for Mariachi 1 through 4 one time, and those aren't bad courses. We're not making judgments on the courses, but they simply don't align with NCAA legislative requirements. And then, like I mentioned, some that are maybe not so easy, where we may have to ask for additional information, would include courses where it could be one decision at one school and another at a different school, and we need to know the content and the curriculum and the assignments and the assessments to have a better picture of whether or not a course may be approved. This is this is an iNACOL webinar, so presumably all of you have an interest in our non-traditional core course legislation. Non-traditional is the word that we use to kind of serve as an umbrella for online, blended, correspondence, independent study. We've talked about how non-traditional may soon become traditional, and those are conversations we can have later. But for now, we just refer to this as non-traditional core courses. Just a brief history for you. Prior to the year 2000, the NCAA prohibited the approval of any quote-unquote non-traditional courses. In the year 2000, legislation was adopted by the NCAA membership that allowed for the approval of certain non-traditional courses. But that language quickly became antiquated, as in the early 2000s, the world of online education exploded. And so in 2007 and 2008, that's when we became familiar with iNACOL, at the time just NACOL, and began to really try to understand that. And we passed legislation, the NCAA passed legislation in 2010 that outlined the requirements for non-traditional courses, and this is what we use today. So here are just some of the pieces of the requirements for non-traditional courses. In addition to meeting all of the criteria we talked about on the previous slide, in terms of being college preparatory and at or above the regular academic level, non-traditional courses have to have, number 1, ongoing and regular access and interaction between the student and the instructor for the purposes of teaching and evaluating and providing assistance throughout the duration of the course. Non-traditional courses must have a defined time frame for completion, and the work must be available for validation and evaluation, which suggests a learning management system. Now, those requirements are the backbone of the non-traditional legislation, and it's the backbone of the review that we do when schools submit the questionnaires that we talked about a few minutes ago. We want to know that the instructor is actively engaged in the learning process for the student and not simply there to answer questions on an as-needed basis. We also want to know that students can't race through courses in academically unsound ways. We are very aware of the movement toward competency-based learning and have had a lot of conversations with a lot of different folks about competency-based learning and the reality that competency-based learning and the NCAA requirement for a defined minimum time frame for completion may not necessarily mesh very well, and we're all working together to try to determine what the best path forward is. But so long as abuse continues to occur where students are able to complete courses in academically unsound timeframes, we will continue to have the need for ensuring that schools and programs are establishing defined timeframes for completion of coursework. I want to draw your attention to some trends and issues that are impacting online education. Over the summer, especially, there have been some news stories directly related to high-profile student athletes. This is the reality of the world that we live in, is that with high-profile student athletes comes high-profile interest from not local media, but national media. In this case, this is a screenshot from ESPN that did a series about a month ago on the work that we do here at the Eligibility Center. This particular screenshot that you see here includes a screenshot of its own of work that we received from a student that had taken coursework through an online program. I know you may have to squint your eyes a little bit, but that gives you a picture of some of the things that we see and some of the things that we're working with respect to online education. Another screenshot for you there is something that this is the front page of SportsIllustrated.com a couple of weeks ago, a front story article about a football team that is outsourcing its education through Connections Academy. And I'll advance it to the next slide to tell you that this is an issue and a trend that we're tracking very closely. Per se, there is absolutely nothing wrong with an athletics program outsourcing its education to a school or a program that has been reviewed and approved through us. What we want folks in the iNACOL community to know and understand is that there is a lot of fraud that can occur. A lot of times there's an adult behind the scenes that is manipulating these student athletes. Not always, but there are cases where they are, potentially misleading families, charging over above and beyond tuition for what they're paying for through a particular online institution. There are issues that can be implicit with these types of teams and programs where there may be amateurism issues that have nothing to do with the quality of online instruction that these students are taking. But with that scrutiny from the media comes scrutiny with their athletics programs. So the challenges are you can't assume that you know who you're talking to. You have to be aware and communicate with us. We'll be focusing a lot on this at Virtual School Symposium, but just if you get a phone call from a coach who says, hey, I got a team of boys or a team of girls and we want to outsource 100% of our education to you and your program, what deal will you give us? To proceed with cautions and call us with any questions that you've got, because we are mindful of protecting high-quality online education. We want to make sure that no one is being taken advantage of, whether it's the students and the families or you as the online course providers. For those of you that are from traditional brick-and-mortar schools and or districts, some trends to be aware of is the need for quick fixes. There are students who find near the end of their senior year that they're not going to make the minimum eligibility requirements, and so they scramble to try to find the quickest fix, and they will be predatory sometimes in trying to find that quick fix. So it's important to be aware of ensuring that you're holding the line on the quality and the integrity of your programs. Another issue that's occurred, this is nothing new, but we want people to be aware of, is that sometimes students may be enrolled in multiple courses from multiple providers simultaneously, and that has the potential to raise some triggers here on our end that may result in additional review or investigation of the coursework taken by that student and perhaps even the programs from which the courses were taken. Again, we'll be talking about that quite a bit at the Virtual School Symposium, but I just want to put that on everybody's radar. Excuse me. I want to move on to the new requirements. The new requirements that are coming in 2016 are dramatic. If the new requirements in 2016 were placed on the current college freshmen, we would have, I forget the exact number, but between 15 and 20% of the freshman student athletes in all sports ineligible for competition. And if you look specifically at men's basketball and football, the percentage of students ineligible for competition will be upwards of 35 to 40%. So these new rules and requirements are dramatic, and they start with, again, what I mentioned earlier, which is that our end game is college success, college graduation. And the best predictor of graduation in the 6-year federal time frame is first-year success, and the best predictor of first-year success is high school core course GPA and SAT score. In other words, our initial eligibility requirements are the best predictor. And so the NCAA membership in Division I only has decided that they want to increase those standards. So in short, the new standards, in order to be a full qualifier, students will have to earn a higher core course GPA and a higher test score. Those students who meet the current requirements but do not meet the new requirements will fall into a new category called academic red shirts. And those students will be eligible for practice and their athletically related financial aid, which means that we're not limiting access, but they will not be able to compete in their first year. And then obviously students who don't meet any of the requirements are just simply non-qualifiers. So I want to break that down for you. To be a full qualifier, students must earn a 2.3 minimum core course GPA. And again, that sliding scale that we talked about earlier has changed, and it's increased both the test score and GPA requirements. I'll also talk to you in just a minute about a core course progression requirement that plays into this as well. So this is the new sliding scale. And what you see on the left-hand column is the current sliding scale. The middle column is the new sliding scale with the SAT and ACT requirements. So like I mentioned, the new minimum core course GPA is a 2.3 for a full qualifier, but for a given test score or for a given GPA, the subsequent requirement is higher. So as an example, excuse me, a student with a 3.5 core course GPA currently only has to score a 420 on the SAT in order to be eligible. Now, obviously, you look at that and you laugh and you say, my goodness, what student lives in that stratosphere? Very few is the answer. This is just the way that the data shakes out. But I'm using this to illustrate the difference, is that in the new 2016 requirement for full qualifier status, that same GPA of a 3.5 requires a 600 SAT score. So the way to look at it is students with a given GPA will be expected to score approximately 180 points higher on the SAT. Or if you want to look at it slightly different, you can look at a given test score and compare the difference in the GPA that's required. So if you look at the very bottom of the SAT scale in this particular screenshot, and obviously you can get the full version online, the difference is about half of a unit core course GPA. So for a 620 SAT, the current standard is a 3.0, whereas the new standard will be a 3.45. So these are dramatic increases in both the test score and GPA requirement for prospective student athletes in order to be fully eligible for practice, aid, and competition. On top of that, of the 16 core courses that are used in calculating the student's core course GPA, 10 of them have to be earned prior to the start of the student's 7th semester. 7 of those 10 must come from the areas of English, math, or science. Those 10 core courses that are completed prior to the start of the 7th semester are locked in, meaning that we will use the best 10 core courses that satisfy the requirement and lock them in. So students, if they want to repeat courses, must repeat them almost simultaneously, meaning that they need to repeat the courses at the time that they have failed them. No longer can a student get an F or a D in English 1 in their 9th grade year and then repeat that same course as a senior to try to boost their GPA. It's a way for us to try to get at the issue that we were faced with, where students were taking an inordinate number of core courses in their senior year. So this is a way for us to ensure that students aren't backloading their senior year simply to grab eligibility. It's meant to really drive academic preparedness all through high school. And we are working on a comprehensive plan. We've been working with a number of organizations, both on the high school side and the collegiate side, to get the word out, because the current high school freshmen are the ones that will be the first to be subject to this new rule. And now more than ever, 9th grade academics count. So that's the important piece there. This is some helpful information for you. This is the last slide I have for the presentation, and then I know Rob has been kind of tracking some of the questions that folks have asked, and I'm happy to answer questions. This is our website, eligibilitycenter.org. You're welcome to always call our toll-free phone number. That is devoted. That number you see there is devoted to the high school community. Especially during the busy times of the year, the wait time that you might experience on our general phone line can be upwards of 30 to 60 minutes, whereas it's dramatically reduced if you call this high school phone number. On our website, you can find the high school portal, which has a resources page full of really helpful information. The guide for college-bound student athletes is especially helpful as well. So I encourage you to visit those. I'll hand it back over to Rob.
There were a couple questions that came early on, and I think I'll go back to those first. And two of them are kind of related. And so the first one Lynette asked was, she asked about she had a question about defined period for completion. Is NC2A open to the period depending on the course load? For example, a course could have an 18-week period for completion when it's taken along with 4 other core courses in the fall or spring, but a 9-week period for completion in summer semester. Does that meet the qualifications, and is that okay? Are you there, Nick? Okay, if you're talking, let's see, I think I'm talking. Just click on the talk button. You should be able to talk too. You may have unclicked the talk button. Uh-oh, I think we lost Nick. I'm sure he'll be back on in a minute. I wonder what happened. Okay, well, while we're waiting, because I'm sure he'll come right back on here. So I had a couple questions here, both about time period completion. Lynette asked about the completion, whether the course was during fall or spring semester versus summer. And then Lee asked about defined time, and he said our school is completely asynchronous and doesn't fit well to tell someone they can't finish a course in less than a certain amount of time for another reason than just some arbitrary minimums put on it. How would he react to that? Okay, so those are both online learning related questions. And then the other question somebody asked was, Chris asked, how the NC2A differentiates between online and blended learning, and at what point does a course go from blended to online and fit that in?
Hey, Nick, I'm back. Can you hear me?
I knew you'd come back. So I was just reviewing the questions, and we were going to ask you when you came back. So I'm glad you're back. I knew you'd come back.
When I'm in an in-person presentation and someone asks a question I don't like, I usually just run out of the room altogether. So for this one, I just pretended that my wireless went out on me or something.
Yeah, that was
I'm
nice.
Sorry.
Anyway,
here's what I heard. Yeah, go ahead.
The first one is really about defining the defined period for completion. So there's 3 different pieces to this. One is, Okay, so a student takes a course in fall or spring and it's 18-week, but in the summer they take it 9-week. Does that meet the completion requirement? And the follow-up question really is about, in an online class, if the course is completely asynchronous, and how do you put a time period on an asynchronous course is the second part.
Those are hard questions, and they're questions that we've wrestled with since we put in the legislation. So here's what it is at the end of the day, we want to ensure that there's quality control, that programs aren't allowing students to race through courses. We want to know that there's some structure to the courses. There's some element of time involved in that. Now, our legislation does not go so far as to dictate what a minimum time frame for completion has to be, or whether it's to be measured in seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, quarters, trimesters, semesters, what have you. We're happy to hold a school or a program accountable according to whatever they want us to hold them accountable to. Meaning that some schools they have a 18-week semester, and students cannot complete the course outside of that time frame of 18. That is their minimum and their max. Whereas other schools and programs are, like you mentioned, asynchronous, where students are moving through at their own pace. We have no inherent problem with students working at their own pace, but we do want to ensure, again, that schools and programs have some degree of quality control where the interaction with the teacher is such that the students are completing the courses in a time frame that isn't unreasonable. I know that that's a really difficult question to answer because it just depends on so many circumstances and variables. And I guess the important thing for you all to know is that those of you who already have lists, you know this. We have worked with you on what your time frame is, and those who maybe haven't gone through the process, we will work with you on what your time frame is based on your unique circumstance. And again, this issue of time frame is an issue that is really tricky because of the movement toward competency-based learning. And again, we work with Chris Sturgis and Susan Patrick and others on this issue. And I think that what maybe, as I've talked to folks in the online industry about our position with respect to competency-based learning, what folks have been surprised to know is that a lot of programs call themselves competency-based learning, but really their program is nothing more than a series of true, false, multiple choices where students can literally click their way through the course, earning 80% mastery on all of the quizzes and tests. And if a kid misses a true, false, multiple choice and gets another crack at the, another bite at the apple and gets to guess again and achieve mastery in that way. So those are there's so many variables with respect to the role of the instructor and the nature of the assignments and the assessments that all of that plays into a school or program's establishment of a minimum time frame. But kind of my guidance and counsel to a school or program that, like you said, a course could be done in a short period of time, if that's all they're working on during the summer is that one course, well, that's the scenario we want schools to tell us about. Because if there is a case in which a student completes a course in a time frame that violates that school or program's minimum time frame, then we have to ask more questions and probe deeper, because there may be more issues at hand, some that may have something to do with that school or program, others maybe not. Maybe that school or program has been abused by a prospective student athlete and the adults in that student's life, and they have, because of the way their program has been set up, opened themselves up for abuse, and we don't want that to happen either. So I guess it's the best way I know how to answer to a large group whose programs and models vary so much from one another.
So it sounds like part of the answer to that is that's an ongoing conversation that you're continuing to have to define that, and that, of course, fits with competency education as well.
No question about it. And I just want to say this, too, is that
go ahead.
Our annual in-person high school review committee meeting is actually in 2 weeks, and this is one of the most important items on our agenda. And believe me, there are a lot of really important issues facing the NCAA as it relates to secondary education, but this issue of time frame and competency-based learning is one of the most important items on our agenda. So I just want folks to know that.
Okay, and so the next question really has to do with blended and online learning. The question from Chris really is, at what point in a course does blending trigger your requirements? Or another way of asking the same question is, so we've got a blended learning course, but at what point does it fall into your online learning category?
That's a lovely question that I don't have a very good answer for.
Okay.
I do know that obviously blended learning is an emerging model. I'm aware of the work that Insight Institute has done, Michael Horn and his folks have done on the 4 blended learning models, familiar with the framework. There isn't a line at the moment in terms of an NCAA official policy on what constitutes blended versus not. I think the presence of an LMS certainly would indicate that it would be subject to our non-traditional core course legislation. Beyond that, it's a great question. I don't have a very good answer yet.
So it sounds like the current answer, though, to that question is if within the structure of a regular brick-and-mortar school they're offering blended learning courses, then it meets, and that school and those courses have been approved, then it meets that requirement. Would you say that's true?
Well, yeah. So if a traditional high school is moving towards blended learning in one or more courses, the best practice would be to call our toll-free customer service line, explain the scenario, and let us determine whether or not sending the non-traditional coursework questionnaire is the right thing to do or not. Our best practice is always better to ask before rather than after, and we'll be happy to work with schools through that process. Yeah, Lisa Frayne says, call Nick on his cell phone. Lisa, we won't be friends anymore if that's really what you want us to do.
Yeah, so I guess that's an important part. You know, Nick and his team field these questions all of the time, and so that's part of the reason for this webinar is to try to centralize the information so that you all have it. So is there, Nick, is there specific criteria that you use for approving online or blended courses?
Yeah, and I saw that question too. That is the non-traditional core course legislation, which is, I believe, NCAA bylaw 14.3.1.2.2, is that framework for evaluating non-traditional courses. And the slide that outlines the role of the instructor, the time frame for completion, the presence of an LMS, that is it. So a way to say that is that we need to review a program to ensure that the role of the instructor is for teaching and evaluating and providing assistance throughout the duration of the course, mandatory interaction, and that there is a defined time frame for completion. Those are the inputs that we currently have to evaluate programs. Now, I've also participated in discussions with INACOL, and I know a couple of you on this webinar were a part of that as well with respect to kind of longer-term outcomes-based education metrics that can be used, and we are aware of that conversation. And as those metrics are established, we're certainly open to the idea of looking at output evidence-based measures, perhaps to complement or even in lieu of, if appropriate, the input measures that we currently have to evaluate a program.
And I think that pretty much covers all of our questions. Somebody asked about a link to download a copy of the slideshow. Nick, I'm assuming it's okay to share this so we can put it on our website.
Yeah, as long as I get a cut of the revenue, that's good.
Absolutely, and then I'll send you the link too, so that you can send this on to other people that might have questions.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right, so
this was a free webinar, right? So my revenue is going to be pretty limited.
Yeah. So I'd like to invite all of you who have been on this webinar to take a minute to evaluate how we did here. And again, I want to thank you for being here and being part of this. As part of what we do in INACOL, it's really the collaboration and interaction with a variety of people, such as Nick and the NC2A and his counterpart Mark, that increases the conversation. And you heard Nick talk about how these are ongoing conversations, and what's traditional versus non-traditional continues to change in front of our very eyes. And so that's part of the process that we go through all the time, and part of the role that INACOL plays. So once again, thanks for being here, and thanks again, Nick, for taking your time. And if you've got other questions or other input, feel free to email me or anything else that I can help you with. Otherwise, we'll look forward to seeing you at some future INACOL webinar or at the Virtual School Symposium. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye for today.